indicates disclosure is coming. What I'm going to show you tonight is something that when I was studying the presidents, I came across and discovered a pattern on my website, which is the president's UFO website. It's in the conclusion. It's called the disclosure pattern. And it was just something that as I researched, I found these weird little things where people were dropping information in the UFO community, and I just cataloged them.
Stand that way about 2 feet.
Okay. And I found these little strange things that were happening. Now, I started working on this lecture about 4 months ago, and I found tremendous amounts of stuff. I actually cut the lecture in half, and then a couple nights ago I cut a whole few more sections out of this thing. And so basically all you're going to get today is glimpses of disclosure. There's an awful lot more of the Clinton stuff, which I sort of became famous for because I filed an FOA with the Clinton administration and got 1,000 pages of UFOs out of UFO documents dealing with the Rockefeller Initiative. That stuff I'm going to leave out. I'll leave it for another time because I was just at the Clinton Library. It's ready to open in about 6 months. And I was just thinking of all the FOIAs I'm ready to file when they finally accept, because the president's records are exempt for 5 years. But we know all the names of the people inside the Clinton administration, and there are actually people in the building today who were actually involved in the initiative that Rockefeller had. The only other thing I want to tell you about myself is that I'm from Canada. I'm from Manitoba, which is right in the middle. It's one of the coldest places in the world, and it's also known for its fishing. We have, Minnesota has 10,000, we have 100,000 lakes. We have fairly big fish because all our lakes aren't fished out. And I just want to give you an example of an American who was up there earlier this year fishing. Hang on. Hang on. Now the remote isn't working. Come on. Since Harold Sherman, oh no, now we've lost the signal. Since Harold Sherman wrote the book The Green Man in 1946, predicting that extraterrestrials would visit the Earth, and since he wrote The Return of the Green Man in 1947, also talking about extraterrestrials coming to the world, and since the Army revealed that it had recovered something at Roswell, New Mexico, most of us have been trying to figure out exactly what's going on. And what I'm going to say now is a little bit controversial, but I think if you take a good look at ufology, you'll find out that the ufological worldview, a lot of what we believe in ufology today is not stuff we figured out. It's stuff that was leaked to us from inside the government. And this is what I'm going to show you today. I'm going to show you, and I think you're going to find it quite obvious what they were doing. It is not so much a cover-up in terms of people figure it's totally covered up. What you're going to see today is it's not totally a cover-up. They are releasing material. Disclosure techniques. This is one thing I found in looking at it, is that the Democrats use direct efforts to try to get documents, UFO material out. The Clinton administration, for example, declassified 800 million pages of material, figuring that the UFO material would come along with everything else. The Republicans, on the other hand, use backdoor cloak and dagger methods to get it out, and actually, surprisingly, were more effective at getting UFO information into the UFO community. The other point I want to make before I actually start showing you the examples, and that's, I'm not really going to analyze why this happened. People have their own little view of analyzing different theories. I always call it standing still in ufology and urinating on each other's legs. But what I've found is that, and looking at the papers of people like Kissinger and Cheney and all these different people, I've looked at their papers, and what I've come to the conclusion is they are not evil men running a cover-up. They are good men who are absolutely petrified at what they're facing and how they're going to handle it. The first story, I'm going to skip ahead. There's stories before this, but the story I'm going to start with is Ward Kimball, who was one of the 9 major animators at Walt Disney. They were called, Disney called them the wise old men. At the 1979 MUFON Symposium, and anybody who's got the notes, or I know somebody had offered me notes. Anybody who's got notes from this is a very important lecture. It wasn't documented. It doesn't appear in the proceedings. He told the story of Walt Disney being approached in 1955 or 1956 before Sputnik, and was asked to do a UFO documentary in order to acclimatize the people to the fact that the extraterrestrials were here. Disney was a special agent with the FBI. He had government connections and agreed to go along with the whole deal. What happened was he started to make the documentary. He got the whole documentary going, and at the very last minute the Air Force came in and said, no, we're pulling the film, sorry, you can't use the film. And he went ahead and did the documentary. You'll see as I go through, this has happened over and over and over again. Coming in, influencing very powerful people to spread the message, and not giving them anything that they can take to the bank that they can prove this thing is real. And that's my impression of what's going on. They want the information to get out, but they cover it with disinformation so that nobody can actually end the cover-up. Mike Maloney was a major photographer in the UK, and statements that he made actually indicated that Disney might actually later on have gotten the film. This was Georgina Bruni, who described what Mike Maloney said after a trip in the early 1970s to the Disney studio. He met with the head of Disney Studios at that time, I don't know who it was, and 4 of the animators. One of the animators, and I don't know if it was Ward Kimball, took him to the house, and here's what Georgina Bruni said. He described this. He was shown a movie, and on the movie there was an alien was dead on a table, and there was one moving around on the floor. He was given no information to the source of the footage. He was told it was top secret, but he was told no doubt it was a genuine piece of old film, and he described it being similar to the alien autopsy film, although it wasn't the same one. He said of the footage, if the film that I saw was a fake, it was a brilliant fake. So again, here you have this leaking of material, and he wasn't able to confirm, he wasn't able to get a copy of the film, and this was leaked into the community. In 1956, if people who believe there's a straight-out cover-up, that they're trying to cover it, have to explain this. In 1956, a movie called UFO was made. Not only did they not cover it up, 3 of the main people from Blue Book, Chop, Fournay, and Ruppelt actually advised on the film. They were advising how to set it up, how to do it, and 2 key UFO films from the 1952 Robertson panel and 1953 Robertson panel were declassified to be used in the film. So they actually, the U.S. Air Force actually provided film for a UFO documentary and declassified it. Nicholas Mariana was one of the people that had the Montana film, actually played himself in the movie. It was one of the 2 movies that they declassified for the movie. This is the most important part of the lecture. And majority of people will say that the whole thing is disinformation. It's just straight out disinformation. This is the case you have to explain. Colonel Quintanilla was one of the chiefs of Blue Book. He wrote a book which you can find on the NIDS website. And in the book, he wrote the book. The title he wanted to give it was The $20 Million Fiasco. And his contention was that Project Blue Book was the worst thing that the U.S. Air Force ever got into. And here is how he describes. He said the ATIC was given this pseudoscientific project dropped in their lap. On a long-term basis, it turned out to be a monumental headache for all its commanders. ATIC commanders would cringe on hearing the word UFO. And in terms of all I'm going to say, you've got to remember this. The Project Blue Book was an absolute nightmare that the U.S. Air Force got itself in. Every time there was a UFO sighting, they had to put a spokesman or a colonel or somebody had to stand up and explain what this was. And every day they had to come up with a new explanation to try to explain what people were seeing. It was something that they were dying to get out of. In 1969, they actually shut the program down. They shut it down days before Christmas, and the reason they did that was because the Washington Press Corps was out of town. They wouldn't have to answer any questions about it. So they got out of the UFO business. They were out. They never had to talk about UFOs ever again. It was out. It was finished. In Canada, where I came from, the government got out of the UFO program at almost exactly the same time. In Canada, the government has never, that I know of, made a statement about UFOs. They've never leaked anything into the UFO community. They have remained quiet. For us to go to the government to try to figure out what they're doing, we would have no concept whatsoever what they're doing. You don't know who to talk to. They just haven't made any statements. They haven't done anything. So if you believe that the Air Force got out of it, you have to explain. If you're going to say this is disinformation, you have to explain this next case. And it happened under the administration of Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon was rumored to be very interested in UFOs. In 1973, the Pentagon approaches 2 people, Robert Emenegger and Alan Sandler. This was an official approach. They were approached and they were asked to do a UFO documentary. I think we have the next one is the setup, where Robert Emenegger describes the actual setup, how they got into this program. Robert Emenegger was a skeptic on UFOs, had no interest in UFOs whatsoever, and here's him describing. Oh, there's Robert Emenegger. He was working for Gray Advertising. He was actually working for the Nixon re-election campaign in advertising at the time.
And we went to Norton Air Force Base to discuss other things, among them three-dimensional moving holography and laser and cancer and all of the R&D, advanced research, ARPA kind of project. Okay. And the UFO thing was brought up to us, which I just couldn't believe, but I said, well, okay, we'll go along with it. And one conversation led to another, a contact with the Pentagon. Everybody couldn't have been more open about what we were doing. And anyone along the line could have questioned and said, and I expected them to say, like, what the hell are you got?
What are you talking about? Okay, Emenegger visits, he goes to Norton Air Force Base and they offer him a pile of stuff. Films, they're going to give him the UFO documentary and they want him to do it and they're going to offer him films. It's the Disney thing all over. And here's him describing the trip to Norton Air Force Base, which is where DAVA is, the Defense Audiovisual Agency, which has, if all or if most of the military film for the military.
While discussing several of the subjects, UFOs came up, and Paul here told us about a film of a landing of alien crafts at Holloman Air Force Base.
Now, Paul is Paul Shartle, who is the security manager or the security chief at DAVA. And he was the guy who was handing out the film. In order to get the film, you'd have to go through Paul Shartle. Paul Shartle describes the Holloman Air Force Base film, which I'm going to talk about a fair bit. The Holloman Air Force Base film is, to give you a background, is a film that supposedly was taken at Holloman Air Force Base from a number of different angles. The Americans knew it was coming in. The UFO landed. There was 3 UFOs. One of them landed, and aliens got out. This was all filmed. They met with high-ranking officials there and a CIA guy. They walked down the runway into a building, and this was all filmed. And this is the film that they were offered. Paul Shartle, Emenegger denies seeing it. There's questions whether he saw it. Paul Shartle actually saw the film, and he describes what was on the film.
I saw footage of 3 disc-shaped crafts. One of the crafts landed and 2 of them went away. Why did it land? It appeared to be in trouble because it oscillated all the way down to the ground. However, it did land on 3 pods. A sliding door opened, a ramp was extended, and out came 3 aliens.
What did they look like?
Well, they were human-sized. They had odd gray complexion and a pronounced nose. They wore tight-fitting jumpsuits, thin headdresses that appeared to be communication devices, and in their hands they held a translator, I was told. A Holloman base commander and other Air Force officers went out to meet them.
Now, to give you the importance of this, I think if this works out, I think in 10 years you're going to see this could turn out to be the most important UFO case that's ever happened. The Holloman Air Force Base film, I now know 2 U.S. presidents off the record have confirmed the Holloman Air Force Base film was part of the UFO briefing that they received. In the mid-1990s, early 1990s, PBS in Washington was working on the story of the Carter briefing, story that Carter had been briefed. I went after it. There was a tape. We knew the guy's name, claimed to have been in the room during the briefing. We didn't get the tape. We're still looking for the tape. We're still trying to confirm this story about this fellow. The interesting part is that the story that he tells also says that Jimmy Carter, part of the UFO briefing that he was given, involved the Holloman Air Force Base film. It is one of the stories that they have leaked over and over and over again. For example, Linda Howe can tell you she was offered the Holloman Air Force Base film for a documentary from HBO, then for a documentary for PBS. Emenegger talks about the cooperation. This was not some thing where he was making it up. He was in the Pentagon, and he said when they were working on this deal, and the Holloman, there was a number of things, but the Holloman was the main piece of information in the film that they had. They didn't have to sign in anywhere. They went to Norton, they went to the Pentagon, they just walked in. He said, we didn't sign in, we didn't do anything, we just walked in. Here's him talking about the cooperation of the Pentagon.
We headed for the Pentagon.
said it causes that when people like you know, like me, put these things on the air, it causes the phone lines to be so, you know, it ties up our phone lines. It is not a part of our assignment and our duty or national defense, and on and on. And I was under the fluorescent lights and watching these three plainclothesmen, and I thought I was going to die there for a minute. But my partner had enough sense to say, hey, we're invited here by Mr. Hatch, by Colonel Coleman, and they said, okay, well, just a warning. So off we go to meet, we went off to meet Colonel Coleman. Now, he was the one that looked like Hemingway with a beard walking through the E-ring at the Pentagon. The first thing he said to us was, you know, if you come across information or technology or that is not in the interest of our, against the interest of our national defense, he said you can be fined and imprisoned. So it was like, you know, warning number 2. Then we went into his inner office, and a strange thing happened. He said, come on, boys, sit down. Let me tell you something.
In the office, in Coleman's office, Colonel Coleman's office, he described to me, I'm just going to play a little bit of it, he described to me being a UFO skeptic. He was in the room and he couldn't figure out, like, it was like an ordinary, he'd done a number of documentaries, like this was the same negotiation he'd done hundreds of times before on other issues. He couldn't figure out why these people were talking about this alien landing, and it was like everybody just accepted the fact that they had filmed this alien getting out of a ship and all this sort of stuff. And he describes this curiosity to me as he's sitting in Coleman's office.
Well, they all had a chance. As a matter of fact, you know, one of our agreements was to go over the script at the Pentagon, and if there was any question about anything, they had the right to ask about it. And strangely enough, no one even questioned the thing about the landing at Holloman Air Force Base. Like, oh, okay. It all unfolded. One would call another. For instance, Coleman said, hold on, as we're sitting in his office. Put a call into George. You know, like, want to talk to these guys? So a day later, I think, we went down into the bunker, and there confronted George, and I couldn't have, you know, I think I was pretty straightforward. Just first question was, what about the landing of the alien craft at Holloman Air Force Base? And he kind of went, yeah, well, I'll tell you.
This is Holloman. This is a picture of Holloman. The picture before that was at the front gate, but it was during the war, and I'm from Canada, so I didn't go too close because they had guns. Other films, they were offered a number of other films. Here's one that might sound familiar to you. This is one of the other films they were offered.
We're given a film, a top secret. It was still top secret on it. Quintanella's name was on it. Of a launching at Vandenberg, of which 3 cameras followed the one missile takeoff, and behind it you saw 2 little white, look like transparent moons, just sort of trailing and following it their way, but at every camera, no matter what position, so it wasn't a reflection. So we had Bob Baker, who was the guy who did the 1952 Robertson panel guy. Anyway, Bob Baker is well known at that time. So he came in and analyzed it and said, you know, it's 1,000,001 that it's anything but, it's not the Venus, it's not a reflection, it's this, it's unknown stuff.
Now, Emenegger and Sandler went ahead and there was a book produced, and the documentary did come out. But like the Disney thing, at the very last second, just when they're ready to put the film in, Colonel Coleman from the Pentagon calls the film back, and Emenegger describes this.
As you probably know, it's been tipped already. At the last, we got the projection going pretty well, and the film that we were supposed to, I guess, naively thought, well, we'll just put the film in here. Coleman, along with someone else at the Pentagon, decided to pull the film back to the Pentagon. And I know it was driven back by, the name of the guy slipped my mind, but he had to drive back with his wife in a Honda, and I heard with the film cans in the back, and I heard these little stories about how the car broke down somewhere, and these 2 heavy-set people were sleeping in a, I mean, this has nothing to do with UFOs, I suppose. They were trying to sleep in some motel, and I mean, I got all the sort of details of how the film finally ended up back at the Pentagon.
Now we move on to Jimmy Carter. As I said, the Democratic administrations tried very directly. Jimmy Carter it's been said, well, Jimmy Carter made the promise and then he broke the promise, he didn't do anything. and I'm going to straighten this out because it really isn't true. First, I'm going to play you the actual, and you probably the first time you've ever heard it. This is the actual interview. The audio isn't all that good. This is the actual interview, and it's a scrum interview. It's not. It's in a crowd with the National Enquirer, who was the people who interviewed him. Here's the actual audio of Jimmy Carter making the promise to release the UFO information. Now, the other thing that people, well, this led to, this is a strange story. The Carter promise, it was written up in the National Enquirer in June of 1976. It led to 9,000 letters, UFO letters, coming into the Carter White House. This is an actual picture, which is called 9,000 UFO letters. It's in the Carter Library. And when we tried to find it, there's an archivist who's really into UFOs there. He and I were trying to figure out what happened to these letters. And we couldn't find them. They figured they may have been filed under people's names. There was a woman there. She's the only person in the Carter Library who actually worked for Jimmy Carter. She's a public relations officer at the Carter Library. And she had told me she figured she might have been abducted. So I was outside with her one time, and I said, what do you think happened to the 9,000 UFO letters? And she said, well, what do you think happened to the 9,000? You think, use your head. I mean, you know what happened to them. So she was quite humorous about these letters. What people don't know is that Jimmy Carter made the promise. What people don't know is that Jimmy Carter had a restriction to the promise and had to do with national security. Here's him talking about things he wouldn't release.
I don't say it is to keep information that secret, but that may be some aspect of UFO information that, with which I'm not familiar, that might be related to some secret experiment that we were doing as far as national security and new weapon systems. I certainly wouldn't release that. But if it was something we heard from our national security, you know, in my opinion, as President is very released. I think that's one of them.
Now we move on to an interesting story. This is a story you may have heard the story of. This was a story told by Marcia Smith, who works down the road at the Library of Congress, is the top expert in the United States on the Soviet space program, and she's also one of the leading experts on the American space program. She told Danny Sheehan the story that Jimmy Carter wanted the files from George Bush. So the idea that Jimmy Carter didn't do anything isn't really true. He did try to force the files from Bush when he was being briefed by Bush as president-elect. The former director of the Central Intelligence briefs the new president on intelligence matter. Jimmy Carter asked for the files, and George Bush said to him, you don't have a need to know. Curiosity on the part of the president isn't sufficient need to know. And this story has been going around. Ronald Pandolfi, who is rumored to run the Weird Desk at the CIA, had heard this story, and an intermediary with me sent this to him, and he replied back and he said, I very much doubt the story occurred, that if Bush had said this, he would have known he would be fired right away by turning down the president. Check your sources and use common sense. The fact of the matter is, this happened in November of 1976, and I believe George Bush had already been told he wasn't going to be brought on as DCI. He had resigned effective before the presidency ended. He never served a single day under the Carter administration, so in effect he was fired. What's DCI mean? Director of Central Intelligence for the head of the CIA. Jimmy Carter, one of his problems, he wanted to get the UFO files out. One of his problems was that he ran as a Washington outsider. When he campaigned in short-sleeve shirt to show that he was one of the common people. The other problem that he had, and I don't know if you can read this cartoon, when he came in at the end of the Church Committee on CIA abuses, assassinating foreign leaders, all this kind of stuff. So when he came in, he fired a couple hundred CIA agents. He got rid of them, which didn't make him popular. If you want the UFO secret, it wouldn't make much sense to fire a bunch of people who are actually involved in it. The other thing he did was he cut $5 billion in the defense budget, which didn't make him popular in the military-industrial complex, which probably has a lot to do with keeping the UFO secret. He canceled the B-1 bomber. He shelved a neutron bomb, and he vetoed a nuclear aircraft carrier, and he tried to shut down the draft machinery for the U.S. military, and in effect he got run over. And that's basically the story of Jimmy Carter. He was an outsider, came in, he was described by the Washington people. He was all these people from Arkansas. They were described as people who walked around in bare feet and ate with their hands. They had no respect for Jimmy Carter whatsoever. Majority of his UFO, the material that Jimmy Carter tried to get was he tried to get it through Jody Powell. Jody Powell was running around. He'd gone to the CIA. He went to the FBI. The FBI said, well, we don't really investigate UFOs. Everything we have is handed over to the Air Force. And Frank Press, who was the science advisor to the president, went on behalf of the president to NASA and said to NASA, can you do another Blue Book investigation? And of course, NASA's budget had just been cut by Carter. They were not into another PR nightmare. They knew this was a no-win situation. We're not going to get dragged into this UFO thing. So they said they'd answer the White House mail, and if anybody any legitimate source had a piece of hardware, they would analyze it. So that ended. But Jimmy Carter did run around to different agencies trying to get stuff. What people forget when they say Jimmy Carter didn't get anything and that he didn't fulfill his promise to release the UFO information is that a lot of the documents, 3,000 pages of the documents we have now, all the CIA, all the FBI, all the NSA documents were released in the Carter administration. And after the Carter administration, it went down. Very few documents after that, but the majority of UFO documents were released under Jimmy Carter. He also openly met with UFO people. This is the Prime Minister of Grenada, Eric Gary, who was very vocal, was trying to get UFOs into the United Nations. And Jimmy Carter openly met with him at the White House. And the White House record shows that they did discuss UFOs, although Brzezinski's files are still classified. And that gives the description of what happened in the meeting. So we really don't know what they talked about. Danny Sheehan is a key story in the Carter administration. Carter went for 2 studies, according to Danny Sheehan. One was on UFOs, one was on extraterrestrial intelligence. At the time, Danny Sheehan was the chief counsel for the Jesuit headquarters in Washington, D.C. He's a prominent civil rights attorney, worked on Pentagon Papers, defended Dr. John Mack, has done numerous things, very prominent attorney. One of the reasons he was brought in as a consultant on these 2 UFO studies, a UFO study and an extraterrestrial intelligence study for Jimmy Carter. And one of the things he was asked to do was get the UFO files out of the Vatican Library, because he was a Jesuit, and the Jesuits ran the Vatican Library. So he went to his friend, and here's his story of trying to get the UFO files out of the Vatican Library for a presidential study.
I was contacted by Marcia Smith, the head of the Science and Technology Division of the Congressional Research Service, to see if I, as Chief Counsel for the United States Jesuit headquarters in Washington, D.C., in their National Social Ministry Office, could obtain access to the Vatican Library section that had the information about extraterrestrial intelligence and the UFOs in the Vatican Library in Rome. I agreed to do that as a special consultant to the Congressional Research Service.
He was also asked to do a presentation to the top 50 SETI scientists at JPL on the religious implications of extraterrestrial intelligence being found out by the population on Earth. And here's him describing what he found under this is called the Madison Building in Washington, D.C. This is where they actually brought the classified Blue Book files, and Danny Sheehan looked at them. Here's his description of what he found. And you got to remember, this stuff went to Jimmy Carter. This was all reported back to Jimmy Carter.
Back in 1977, when I was asked to participate as a special consultant to the Library of Congress research group analysis for President Carter, I was given access to the Project Blue Book files, the classified sections of them, during the preparation for a seminar which I was asked to present to the top 50 scientists at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in California in the SETI program. And
Sheehan talks about the two studies and what was, these are studies that went to the president. And he talks about what was in those studies, what was the final conclusion, what Jimmy Carter was told.
She went forward and supervised two of the final studies. The first study reached the conclusion, and this is an official United States government Congressional Research Service report that was prepared by the Congressional Research Service Science and Technology Division and sent to the Science and Technology Committee of the House of Representatives, who in turn sent it to the president. And in this report, they concluded that there were from 2 to 6, at least from 2 to 6, highly technological, intelligent civilizations other than that on our planet, here in our galaxy.
The studies also talked about technological material.
And secondly, they prepared a full report on the UFO phenomenon. It actually had diagrams of all the different shaped UFO craft that were there, and in fact projected that it appeared to be in a certain number of cases, and they indicated that from 5 to 6% of these cases of these sightings, that there was absolutely no other rational explanation for these phenomena, given the caliber of the witnesses, the caliber of the corroboration of the sightings, to lead to any conclusion other than the fact that they appeared to be coming from one or more of these 2 to 6 extraterrestrial civilizations in our galaxy.
The next story that indicates that Jimmy Carter did get some of the answers is a story that comes dealing with Shirley MacLaine, who wrote Out on a Limb, which talked about her UFO experiences, was close friends with Jimmy Carter, even though the Carter administration, if you look at the files, there's no indication that they ever talked or corresponded or whatever. The story I'm going to tell you starts with Nicolas Cage, the actor, appears on the David Letterman show in April of 1995, and in that interview he said that Shirley MacLaine had told him that Jimmy Carter had told her, she had told him that Jimmy Carter had told her that he had access to the bodies and the crafts. And so I'm going to play you the actual audio clip. Shirley MacLaine appears 2 weeks later on Larry King Live. A guy by the name of Art Greenfield, a researcher out of Florida, phones up and asks the question, what did Jimmy Carter actually tell you? The audio is not all that good, but you've got the words on the screen here.
About 2 weeks ago, Nicolas Cage was on the Letterman show and said that Shirley had told him that President Carter had told her he had seen recovered alien spacecraft and aliens in the hangar. Could you tell me exactly what President Carter said?
He didn't tell me that, but he told me many times that when I first wrote Out on a Limb, that he would support me, that it was true, that there were occupants watching the relatives in the universe. He wanted to shine the sunshine light on intelligence, to expose it, see how the people would react, but he didn't, and wouldn't and couldn't at this point.
According to the Philadelphia Inquirer, Jimmy Carter's favorite movie, and according to the archivist at the Carter Library, Carter watched way more movies than Reagan. His favorite movie was Close Encounters of the Third Kind. There was a rumored story that I had heard, which I tried to track down, was that NASA had put a pile of money, Columbia Pictures, which produced. The Close Encounters was on the verge of bankruptcy when Close Encounters came out. NASA put money, and in exchange for the money that NASA put in, Jimmy Carter was given a private screening of Close Encounters of the Third Kind by Steven Spielberg. I went to the Carter Library, checked. There's no indication that Steven Spielberg ever met him, ever corresponded, ever phoned him, until we did an alpha search, and they pulled this strange thing, which is not a photograph. It was a photocopy of a photograph. And here it is. It's a letter being sent from President Carter to Steven Spielberg, and it says on the top, it says in the letter, the president thought you'd like to have this. It's definitely Jimmy Carter, and they've got the letter over his face, so you can't see his face. It's definitely Steven Spielberg. You got Steven Spielberg's envelope over Steven Spielberg's face, and that's not Rosalind Carter. But it did show conclusively that Spielberg and the president did meet. So it seems to semi-confirm the fact that Spielberg had been in there. Spielberg has also always been rumored to be part of a project to acclimatize people, and he was even asked the question, and this is his response. He says, I'm part of a government conspiracy to make America and the world conductive to accepting an alien neighbor. Great. He didn't bother him at all. And there's other stories that I'll show you. One dealt with Ronald Reagan. And this is the last president I'll do based on time. But Reagan was a strange guy, and a lot of strange things happened. The first thing that happened just after he came in is Bill Moore was approached. And Bill Moore was a prominent researcher back in the 80s. If you were back there, you heard all this sort of stuff. He's the guy that actually got the MJ-12 document mailed to his friend and got Stanton Friedman together and brought out the MJ-12 document. He talks about, he wrote the Roswell incident, which made him very, very popular in 1980. And shortly after he put out the book, he was approached. The story is, this is Albuquerque. It was one of the places he was approached. The second place he was approached by the same guy was at Offutt Air Force Base. And the story is told by Greg Bishop, who now is sort of Moore's only friend. I know Greg Bishop very well, and Moore is sort of handing his massive files over to Greg Bishop. Greg Bishop describes the contact by the U.S. government to Bill Moore after he published this massive book and making a deal.
As a result of these books and him going on some kind of publicity tour for them, he was called at a couple places on his trip by somebody at a nearby Air Force base, once in Omaha, Nebraska, and once when he was in Albuquerque. And it turns out that the person that called him when he was in Albuquerque and said, you know, we think you really know what you're talking about, and we'd like to talk to you. That person was Richard Doty, it turned out to be. And he set up a meeting with Bill Moore. But what a lot of people don't know is the first time they met, he met at an Albuquerque restaurant with this guy that became known as the Falcon, and he will still not divulge this person's real name, and neither will Richard Doty or anybody else.
You know, when you are approached and essentially recruited into something, and you're given a choice, either you're in or you're out. You know, you really don't know what you're getting into because they don't tell you very much about what you're getting into. It's either, you know, you sort of a step thing. It's one step at a time. You just get lured further and further into it. And at any point, you can get out of it. If you do, you do. You know, it's the way it is.
There's no such thing as you're so far in you can't get out anymore.
Well, I don't know about that.
It's not for you.
It is, but there wasn't for me. I sort of
You know too much.
was a little bit careful about how I did things.
We'll just leave that at that. He basically... Oh, we got the slides backwards.
Worked for the DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, which is like the military CIA. He presented Moore with a deal. He said, if you will cooperate with us, and he didn't tell him what that cooperation was, the nature of it, then we will give you what you're looking for, which is UFO information from the government as much as we can release to you. And we'll do that over a period of years if you cooperate with us. And he said, well, okay, I guess so. It sounds good. Sure.
Now, Moore, as I said, was basically responsible for getting the MJ-12 document through the Falcon. The Falcon died in 1999. He's not Richard Doty. We thought we had figured out who it was, and Moore said, if you tell me who it is, I'll confirm who it was. But we know it's a Slavic name, and he worked for the Defense Intelligence Agency, and we haven't figured it out yet. Moore ended up getting burned. He ended up leaving the UFO field. But a lot of the things that he brought out still exist. The MJ-12 document, most people look at the MJ-12 document and say, well, I don't know really what to think. But if you ask people about MJ-12, they say, oh yeah, MJ-12 exists. The idea gets out, the document, there's nothing to confirm it. The document can never be proved. The other ideas that he first brought out was the live alien, which I'm going to talk about. The Carter briefing, Moore first talked about. The fact that DIA was the top intelligence agency working on this thing, and that NSA was the top operational agency. Those things are just generally accepted now, but it was Moore that first talked about them back in the 1980s, and these are things that were fed to him. He just couldn't confirm any of this material. After Moore, Robert Emenegger, who had done the 1974 documentary and written the book, was approached again, and he was approached this time by a friend of Ronald Reagan's. And Emenegger told me, he said, I kept asking him, I said, is this Reagan? Is this the administration behind this? And they said, well, we sort of liked what you did, and we'd like you to do another UFO documentary. Here's him talking about his contact in 1985 under the Reagan administration.
Well, you know and his group to take them out to Norton so they could look around. But then Miller was, interestingly enough, the first person. He was head of one of the studios in Hollywood, one of the old ones, and got Reagan his first contract.
An interesting thing is I filed an FOIA on this General Glenn Miller 2 years ago, and I finally got them to respond. There's 49 pages of material in the Reagan Library on this Glenn Miller, and they were only going to release 20 pages, so through Larry Bryant, it helped me filed an FOIA appeal, and I was waiting for the 20 pages to come to see whether there was any discussion between him and Reagan, but the files didn't come. But here's a general who gave Reagan his first job, who's at Dava handing out UFO film. J. Allen Hynek is approached. This is a story Emmenegger tells about J. Allen Hynek being approached, and they're going to hand him UFO film.
Well, anyway, after Hynek came here and he went into the looking, he wanted to see UFO footage, and I think they started pulling it out. And Shottle stepped in as, now this is, I hope you have the characters correct, but Miller said to him, I want you to show Hynek all the UFO footage. And Shottle told me that he said, I'm sorry, sir, you'll have to, give me a written request for that. The answer came back, listen, I'll have your ass, you're going to do it. So I was not there to know all this craziness that went on, but I do know that 3 months later, Casper Weinberger sent a telegram relieving both Scott and Miller of their posts. Why? I don't know. I don't even know if it was related.
So in 1985, Reagan's buddies handing out UFO films. The other one, we got Linda next. Did we skip Howard Bloom? Linda Howe was approached. I asked her, I knew she had a lot of government contacts. They'd contacted her numerous times. I interviewed her about a month ago. She talked for 3 hours about all the things that they had offered her. And her first contact, the main one that you may know, is at Kirkland Air Force Base. She was contacted, brought in. This is an aerial of Kirkland Air Force Base. And the person who brought her in, here's Richard Doty.
Richard Doty picked me up in a small car, and we drove to Kirtland Air Force Base. So I had the experience of watching the guards salute to him as he showed them ID as we went through the gate and pulled up in front of the FOSI office, which was a badly painted building. It looks old, and we went up the steps and went through the door. He obviously was a person who was known there. There was nobody stopping us. He said, my superiors have asked me to show you a document that you can read. You cannot take notes. And I want you to move from the chair that you're sitting in. I want you to move to the chair in the center of the room. But as I looked at that page that was dramatically all caps typed in, where you have paper that typing is in the paper. And it said, it's centered, each line was centered on the page. Briefing document for the President of the United States of America on the subject of unidentified aerial vehicles.
She is offered the Holloman Air Force Base film for a documentary she's doing on HBO. She waits. Doty pulls out of the picture. Other AFOSI people are involved. They wait, and HBO is getting upset about this. And of course, like Emmenegger before and like Walt Disney, the film never appears. And then when they keep contact with her, and then they offer her to do a documentary for PBS. And here's her story about that.
So they don't want me to go forward with HBO, they want me to go forward with PBS. But in this process, he's saying, how much would you take and would you be willing to work exclusively on a military base? And I remember saying, look, if you guys want to hire me to edit film and be part of a production that says this is a production of the
Linda was also offered an interview with one of the last living member of MJ-12.
Well, I think he was an original MJ-12er, and I believe he would have been the last on the list of the original 12. And that is my understanding is who somebody was trying to get me to meet with. I'm saying I was supposed to have a dialogue with one of the original MJ-12.
The live alien story is another one that has been leaked over and over and over again. It's a story that they seem to want us to believe. She's offered an interview with a captain. The story was that the alien was recovered in 1949, lived till 1952, and there was a captain who lived with the live alien during that period of time. Linda Howe in 1989 was offered an interview with the captain, who is now a colonel, who is dying in a hospital in Texas.
And that it was in all these discussions about my being able to go to where this man was in a hospital in Texas with prostate cancer to talk with him directly, because I said even if I could tape record him, this is too valuable. And those were real discussions, and in that process, this man was identified as being one of the people so valuable, this captain, because he could get these telepathic thoughts.
And this offer was an offer made to you. Is Richard Doty making you this offer?
No, this came in a completely different other way. Came through a FedEx proposal to me, where I would go, who would meet me, how I would, to be able to interview a man who was dying, who had stayed with the Eben at Los Alamos. I got an airline ticket. I had an airline ticket.
You bought it or they bought it?
I bought it.
Okay.
He was dying of prostate cancer in a hospital in Texas. And I was so serious from this communication that I got an airline ticket, paid for it,
Okay.
to go. And I think it was the night before the morning that I was to leave, I got a call that said, we're sorry. He says it's off. And I said, why? And he says, he just says it's off.
Howard Bloom was also contacted by a fellow from the National Security Agency and was offered material.
I stumbled onto this really by accident. I'm a reporter, as you said, by training, and my personality, I'm obsessive and a cynic. And I was working on the weapons process and stuff on that. And I was new in the National Security Agency, and I was trying to interview him, and he was trying not to talk to them. So trying to distract me. I said, you should really look into this. This hotshot group of experts were looking into UFOs, the government's back in the UFO business.
He went ahead as an investigative reporter for the New York Times, wrote a book called Out There, talking about the, what he called the UFO panel, or I can't remember, UFO group, but it wasn't called that. It was actually called the Advanced Theoretical Physics Conference. It was held May 1985. It was held at the McLean Secure Facility, and you can see it had a top secret restricted data on it. It was classified, but it really didn't achieve very much. There's also always been a lot of rumors as to who was in the room, so I'll quickly show you. These were the people that were in the room. And this was material that was leaked to Howard Bloom at the New York Times talking about this, but these guys really didn't get very far. Whitley Strieber, after writing Communion, was approached by the government. Here's what they offered him.
I was approached by a retired officer from the Air Force Office of Secret Intelligence with all kinds of stories about how the government had taken 16-millimeter film of an alien that they had done an operation on in 1952 and enabled it to cross the otherwise atrophied vocal cords. A story that struck me as something out of, if I wouldn't have written it as fiction because it was too ridiculous. And they tried to make me believe that aliens had claimed that they had something to do with the creation of Jesus Christ and all sorts of ridiculous things. If I had come out in public with these things, I would have made me look a fool.
There's a lot of other stories about, for example, General Miller was telling the story about being able to recreate Jesus and talking about Jesus with the aliens. There's a lot of people that told that story. Robert Emenegger offered an interview with the to meet the live alien.
That's not right. You're right. Somebody said you can meet an alien down in New Mexico.
course, the live alien story, the stranded alien on Earth, is, of course, E.T. the extraterrestrial, which may have been fed to Steven Spielberg. Steven Spielberg screened E.T. the extraterrestrial for Ronald Reagan, and these are some of the quick, I'm just going to quickly review these. Ronald Reagan, whether these are him trying to disclose things or whether Ronald Reagan just liked to talk about this kind of stuff. Steven Spielberg, this is a picture that was taken minutes before E.T. the extraterrestrial was screened in the White House. This is in the Blue Room. They went to screen E.T. the extraterrestrial, and Reagan leaned over near the end of the movie and said to Steven Spielberg, "I bet you there aren't 6 people in this whole room know how true this whole thing is." And Steven Spielberg said he was surprised. Right after that, Ronald Reagan goes to Roswell, New Mexico, and outside the famous hangar where the bodies and the crafts were, he makes a speech, and he actually makes a joking reference to E.T. right at the beginning of the speech. And this is shortly after he got screened E.T. He was always known to be a little bit into space and this sort of things. Talked about the White House ghost. Lieutenant Colonel Powell, at the time, he described to a presidential biographer one of his jobs was to keep the alien invasion remarks out of the speeches, and that Reagan, when he started talking about aliens at the cabinet meeting, he'd roll his eyes up and say to the guy sitting next to him, "Here we go with the little green men again." So they actually had people to protect Reagan to get him to stop talking about aliens. The alien invasion, I'm just going to quickly go through them. The first actually happened in Geneva with Gorbachev. He talked to Gorbachev about reincarnation. I got that out of the national security files. And he also made the first reference to aliens, how the world would unite if aliens were to attack the Earth. This is what he said. This is in Geneva. And he talks about Halley's Comet. If aliens were to come on Halley's Comet. It's 2 weeks after he gets back, he goes to a Maryland high school, and here he makes the same alien invasion remark, and it's not in the speech. I checked the speeches. He ad-libs this thing at the end of the speech. It's not in the speech. The Reagan audio, I'm going to show you the audio, and you're going to listen to him talk about the alien invasion remark, and this is at the United Nations, and you're going to see on the speech the actual written speech, that these speeches are reviewed by, they're written 25 times and they're reviewed by 25 different agencies. Everybody has to sign off. Stuff doesn't get into a presidential speech unless it belongs there. So you'll see the actual markings as they change the speech with the alien invasion remark, and listen to Reagan talk about it. Oh, it was pulled out. This is Ronald Reagan's actual handwriting saying, "I want the alien invasion remark put back in the speech." They pulled it. He asked to have it back. This is the actual from the document.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet, I ask you, is not an alien force already among us? What could be more alien to the universal aspirations of our people than war and the threat of war?
That wasn't the last time he said. He went to Chicago, and during a question and answer session in 1988 in Chicago, he brought it up again, the same alien invasion remark. And the last slide I'm going to have, I recommend as your homework that you read this book. It has a lot of stuff about how the movie industry was used to create disinformation and information to provide that these people were used. And that's where I'll leave it. I'll leave the Clinton stuff to another time. Yeah?
Could you elaborate a little bit about how Bill Moore got out of the UFO?
He got out because he made the speech in 1989 in Las Vegas and said that he had been a part of a disinformation thing to go after Paul Bennewitz, and Paul Bennewitz had gone off the deep end and had destroyed his life, and just was not popular in the UFO community for admitting he was part of this program to disinform Bennewitz. And basically they would say, in exchange for this information, we want you to do this, and all the information he was getting he knew was half true, half false, and he was trying to weed it together by looking at different stuff. But once he made that speech, he was finished. He just never recovered from that speech, admitting that he had done it. Nobody in ufology would leave, and I think he just realized his career was over, and now he says, "I got as much as anybody's going to get." He told me, I tried to interview him in Los Angeles, he said, "Forget it. I got as much as anybody's going to get. You're never going to get to the bottom of this thing." So that's his contention now, is that he got as far as anybody's going to get, and that's why he got out. But I think he got out because he just got burned when he made this speech in Las Vegas. No, that's Cooper. That's Bill Cooper. Yeah, this is Bill Moore. Okay, thank you.
Just one more. I'm not quite sure I understand your interpretation of all these events that you've described. Are you saying that presidents or have the
Yes. Oh, let me give you an example. Robert Emenegger, Linda Howe told me the story that when she was in Los Angeles, Robert Emenegger showed her a letter from the President of the United States. I immediately got on the phone. I phoned Robert Emenegger. I said, Robert, is this right? Did you get a letter from the President of the United States? There's a long pause. Yeah, that's probably true, he said. I said, well, were there words in there talking about this UFO documentary, and said, thanks for your discretion? Long pause. Well, no, I think it had more to do with my working for the re-election campaign, although he said, I really didn't do anything. So I left it at that. I filed with the National Archives, controls the Nixon files. I filed for Sandler, who was the producer, and Robert Emenegger. I said I want all correspondence between the President and them, and they wrote back and said, we've got nothing on Sandler. We do have the Emenegger stuff, and it's being released probably in June. They're going to release the document, so I'll have this document. And if it does say that Richard Nixon is thanking him for UFOs past, present, and future, the UFO documentary, and thanks for your discretion, I think it's going to be a significant document. Yeah.
That was never released, though? That film was...
Oh, no, it's never released. There's an FOIA to try to get the film, but that's the whole thing. My impression of what they're doing is, as long as you haven't got the film, the documents, or hardware, they don't care what you say. They've got control of the three major elements. So they leak this material because they don't want people stuck in 1947 with the attitudes back then. They're releasing this material in a bunch of disinformation. The idea gets out and nobody can prove anything. Yeah?
My recollection when I saw the past, present, future film right after it came out
Yeah.
was that little, the 7 seconds of
Yeah.
the film of the object coming down the
Okay.
mountainside was part of the real film.
Okay.
So it was released briefly?
Well, what they had to do, because they didn't have the film, they went with recreations. And the story was that there was 7 seconds of the actual film that this object is coming down, and all of a sudden it turns into a jet fighter or something. So I asked Robert Emenegger 3 weeks ago, I said, Robert, there's a story that there's a few seconds of actual film that from the Holloman Air Force Base film in the documentary. Is that true? Long pause. Well, no, that's not really true. I said, did they give you film? Well, yeah, they gave me film. And I said, well, why would they give you, I can't understand, like, why would they give you 7 seconds of film? And he really couldn't answer the question. But he did admit they gave him film that was used in the documentary, and this has always been a rumored story that there was 7 seconds of the actual film of this UFO landing at Holloman Air Force Base that was shown on the actual documentary. And why they put it in there, I don't know.
Investigation back then, at that point determined that was
Yeah.
part of the real film.
Emenegger didn't deny it, but he was sort of dancing around the, I think he was just, he told that he was given it, but he could never talk about it, and he's in a difficult situation. Yeah.
Can you tell us just real briefly what you would have said about the Clinton administration?
The Clinton administration basically is, I think most of the presidents did get briefed. I think the Clinton administration was an administration that tried very hard to get to it. The Rockefeller Initiative. Hillary Clinton was extremely interested, made indirect contact with different researchers. They were very interested in trying to get to the bottom. When I was in Ozark last week, a woman came up and said that she thinks Bill and Hillary Clinton were involved in a UFO sighting. I said, please tell me about this. She said, it's either them or very close friends. They go to her sister's restaurant and stuff. So they were very interested in the thing. They tried to get it out. And just to give you a quick story, to give you an example of him trying to get it out, the Roswell report, the first Roswell report, I couldn't figure out why there's 2 Roswell reports. The first Roswell report comes out, and it's released in November of 1995. Bill Clinton gets a copy. He makes a speech, and as I said, when stuff is in a speech, it's there for a reason. He gives a speech in Belfast, Northern Ireland. It's a peace speech. There's 2 kids. There's a letter writing competition. Bill Clinton sitting on the stage with the 2 kids who won the letter writing competition, but he doesn't talk about them. He talks, he makes a statement. He says, Ryan, if you're out in the audience, here's the answer to your letter. No, as far as I know, a UFO did not crash at Roswell, New Mexico. But if the U.S. Air Force did recover bodies, they didn't tell me about it, and I want to know. 1997, this is the end of 95, 1997, the Air Force comes out with a second Roswell report, and this is why. It talks about the bodies. They say, oh, we dropped the dummies out. That's what the 1997 report is. It's the answer to President Clinton's demand. If they had bodies, they didn't tell me, and I want to know. And that directly indicates that Bill Clinton didn't know he was on the outside, and he actually challenged them in an open speech in front of 80,000 people in Belfast to give him some answers. Yeah?
Concerning Vandenberg missile launch film, 13 or 14 years ago, an Air Force major showed me one of these monthly Vandenberg missile launches, broad daylight, good field light tracking camera. Flying saucer comes up beside it, tracking it, hits it with a white beam of light, and
Yeah.
blows up.
Yeah.
That same major told me that later they were tracking it, engine burnout, it got up to the top of trajectory, tracking it on radar only, an unidentified blip joined up with it. Both of them disappeared from the radar screen. 3 days later, that missile was put back in its orbit and it hit the target.
Is that something? Yeah.
Somebody's demonstrating.
Yeah, yeah. And that I'm surprised they would show Eminager a film like that to offer where you have it dealing with missiles. It's top secret film. Thank you very much.
What is the Rockefeller Initiative, just general? Is it J. Rockefeller?
No, it's Lawrence Rockefeller, who had seen a documentary on Roswell and had determined that he was friends with the president, he was going to the president, and he was going to get the answers. He was going to get them to declassify. He was cut off by the science advisor, Clinton's science advisor, and they tried to handle him. And there's a long series, that was 1,000 pages of information I got, was these letters going back between Gibbons, who was science advisor to the president, and Rockefeller, and there was a briefing given, but and then rumored stories that Rockefeller talked to the president and Hillary in the 1995 their holidays in Wyoming, and it was an initiative that failed. Rockefeller never really got to the president, never got him to declassify, but he wanted Clinton to declassify all the UFO files. Yeah.
Are you aware of any of the people who may have been telepathically drawn to some of these presidents who had messages to get out and they were being carried out by those who could capture them? Have you ever heard anyone come to you and tell you that this information, you know, in dream time, people, whatever you're holding on consciously is released. Have you ever heard of anything like that happening?
That they tried to get to the president?
That they were sending it out, and that they had a need to, but certain people who had telepathic, I guess,
I've never heard that.
But that's what happened to me with Ronald Reagan.
Is that right?
And the thing of it was, I absolutely had an opportunity to meet him, which was off the wall, because I'd seen an article written by a Republican in the newspaper. For some reason, I was drawn to call this gentleman, never saw him in life. He invited me to his office. While I was sitting there, he was on the phone with the White House. But he said, he just stopped for a minute, didn't know why I had come, and he said, would you like to go to the White House with us tomorrow? I said, no, I'm just here to talk with you about a neighborhood, you know, something to do with neighborhoods. Anyway, I ended up meeting him in a small room, no larger than this, with a hall, with a stage. And when he came out to give the award and whatever, and talk about the neighborhood situations and whatever, he was getting ready to walk away like this, and he stopped. And he looked out at me, and I was standing there thinking, oh, then he said, you know, I guess his head. So then I walked on. Then he got to the edge of the stage, and he came back, and he looked again. By this time, all of the Secret Servicemen had taken that one large step forward with their hand in their, you know, suit. And I'm thinking, I'm trying to applaud like everybody else, thinking, no, I'm not doing a thing. But he looked at me, and then as if to say, I know you. And that was the first time I realized that as I was seeing him in my dreams, he was seeing me, because he was so isolated in the way we were just there alone right by the White House. And I know this was heavy on his heart. A lot of this was very heavy on his heart. Oh, there's much more that he seemed to communicate, which was borne out as true. But why that happened to me, of all people in the world, I don't know. That's why I'm asking you, did you know of any?
I know they were very interested. Like, he was very interested in psychic phenomena and things like that.
And he felt so, not only, it wasn't just misunderstood, he felt so limited, as if he were being made to be the child in a situation where he wanted to, you know, I don't want to say for a change, but where he wanted to have some kind of authority and speak what he knew, but he was, you know, and he just felt there was a helplessness.
Boy, I'd sure like if you would give me, I'll give you my business card outside, you would let me know the story.
There's so much more to that which came through,
Who was this?
Ronald Reagan.
And I hate to say, but I love him to this day. I feel very protective in some way of him. Very strange, I know, but that's true.
A quick question, are you saying that maybe there were two different factions and one wanted to get it out, but then
I think that's what's happening. There are stories that inside they're fighting about how to deal with it.
Or are they wanting to get out, but pulling it back? Like you said, they give little information, but the people who get it can't really corroborate it because there's no documents. So, or maybe it's both.
Well, that's what they're doing. They're letting it out, but they need certain concepts to get out. Like the idea of one of the stories was this general Miller came to Emanager and said, if we had technology that showed Jesus going up into a beam of light, how would you do that in a documentary?
No, I understand, I'm not being clear. Do you think of it as one, the group, the administration, or whoever it is, saying, it unified, get this out? Or is it just one part saying get it out, but it's stopped by the other part?
I think it has to come from the president. That's where I asked, like for example, last Robert Emanager did when he was hedging on the Nixon letter. I said, did Nixon know? Well, I don't know. I asked Bob Haldeman, who's the chief of staff, and he said, yeah, I've heard something about the Haldeman Air Force Base film. But that's where this letter is very important. It would indicate that the president was behind this. And the same with Richard Nixon. He was asking Miller, he said, is Reagan behind this? Is this administration? He's trying to figure out where's this coming from? Who's directing this thing? And I think it's something that would have to have the president behind it. Yeah. Yeah.
I really enjoyed your talk. You seemed like a serious researcher.
Yeah, thanks.
I'm Dr. Joe Gross. I've retired, and I've been talking on this for years and years. I met Danny Sheehan about 2.5 years ago in California. I was very impressed.
Yeah.
The tapes you had from him, were they tapes you made? Or
they were tapes of an interview that he did with a Canadian radio station. You can actually get them off the internet. It's called Strange Days Indeed, the radio show.
Strange Days
Indeed.
And those tapes are available on it?
Yeah, they're on there. The archive, certain shows, and Danny Sheehan's interview, I helped set up the questions for this interview because he had very important things, and I was telling him, ask him this, ask him this, and I was sort of involved in the interview.
Right, I was going to recontact him again this matter of fact. I thought he might be at this conference. Do you know what he's been doing recently?
Well, he's working for Kucinich. He's an advisor to Kucinich.
Oh, really?
And he's still doing legal work, and he's extremely busy. He spoke in Laughlin in February, but he didn't talk about this. He talked about his ideas of how things work in politics and that sort of thing. But he didn't talk about. We're waiting for him to talk about this thing again.
Yeah.
Because and show the Vatican letters. We've asked him numerous times to see the Vatican letters.
Now what happened at the Vatican library?
They turned him down. Both times they turned him down. He said he was shocked. They turned him down. And the second letter said, this letter is on behalf of the President of the United States. And they still turned him down. He said it was the only time the Vatican library ever turned him down for anything.
Then they must be having something behind.
Yeah. And the rumor stories, they have huge UFO files in the Vatican library.
I just wonder, are you going to be around tomorrow?
I'm around, yeah.
Okay, so we'll talk some about that. You mentioned this fellow at the Weird Desk.
Pandolfi, yeah.
Which I'd heard of. Is there any other references to him or the Weird Desk or anything like that?
There's lots of stories on the internet, indirect stories about him. He sort of pops in and pops out. He's sort of like, he'll make a comment on something, but he sort of claims